Hey everyone, Nathan Rose here. I'm the author of the book Chess Opening Names, and in this series I'm going through each of the chapters in my book, telling a little more of the history and heritage of the great game of chess as told through the opening names. If you'd like to grab a copy of my book, I will link up to it in the description and the comment section below, available in paperback, audiobook and Kindle. So grab yourself a copy if you enjoy these stories. Today we're continuing with the Philidor defense. The Philidor defense starts e4, e5, knight f3, and then d6, defending the e5 pawn with another pawn rather than the more common move, knight to c6. So the Philidor defense is named after a man by the name of Francois-André Danican Philidor. And with a name like that, it'll come as no surprise to you that Philidor was a Frenchman. He was the best player in the world from about the mid-1700s until his death in 1795. And in addition to being a fine chess player, Philidor was also a renowned musician. He was actually an opera composer. And he came from a long line of musicians. It's actually possible to trace Philidor's family all the way back to his great-grandfather. So his great-grandfather, his grandfather, his father, Philidor himself, as well as various brothers and uncles and so on, all served as musicians in the French royal court. So you can see that his destiny was laid out for him before he was even born. And he fulfilled that promise. He became one of the greatest opera composers in France, and his music is still played today. So as a boy, he was in the choir, and at about age 10, he was bold enough to challenge one of the senior musicians to a game of chess. And the senior musician probably didn't expect much of a game, but he agreed to play the young boy, and you can probably guess what happened. Philidor won, and he immediately ran away, fearing the retribution of the man whose pride must have been a little bit damaged by being beaten by a kid. We all know that feeling now, don't we? So despite his phenomenal achievements in music, it really is because of chess that Philidor has his place in history. As I mentioned before, he was the best player in the world in that time period of the mid-1700s till the late 1700s when he passed away. There are a few reasons that we can be confident that Philidor was the best player in the world during that time period. For one thing, he was based in Paris, and Paris in the mid to late 1700s was the center of the chess universe. It's where all the best players played, and Philidor was the best of them all. He played frequently in the famous Café de la Régence, and none could match him. For another thing, Philidor travelled often. He would go around different European cities as part of his music career, and whenever he travelled, he would play the strongest local players, and again, he didn't have any real serious competition. In fact, he would often give his opponents odds and still win. So what do I mean by odds? That's where, for example, if Philidor was playing black, he might start without his f-pawn. He would just remove that from the board and play a pawn down from the start and still win. The other thing that he would do is he would give his opponents two moves at the start of the game. So imagine, again, Philidor playing black. He allows his opponent to play two moves of their choice like this, and then Philidor starts the game. Or sometimes he'd even do both. He would allow his opponents two moves and start with one less pawn and still win. Let's just put the Philidor defense back on the board. The other thing that set Philidor apart from his peers was his ability to play blindfold simultaneous chess. So this is where Philidor was playing more than one opponent at a time while not being able to see any of the boards. He would just have to keep multiple games in his mind and play them from memory. Now this is something that many modern master players can do, but back then in the 1700s this was unique. And in fact, Philidor didn't think that people would believe that he had really done this, so he got his opponents to sign affidavits that indeed he had played these blindfold simultaneous games successfully. So a fantastic player, but it was really his contributions to chess theory that has secured him his place in history. And it was international master Jeremy Silman who said that Philidor was one of the first to treat chess as a science rather than just a game. So most famously, Philidor published a book called Analyse des jeux d'échecs. Apologies for that French pronunciation. Maybe there's some Francophiles watching this who can correct me. But anyway, this book, published in 1749, went through many editions and many translations. It was so influential. It was in this book where Philidor recommended the opening, which now bears his name. Of course, Philidor didn't invent this move, d6. Right after knight f3 attacking the e5 pawn, there were countless games where black would have, instead of playing knight c6, have defended with the pawn instead. But it was Philidor who recommended it, and his reasoning was that he didn't like the blocking of pawns with pieces in front of them. So he would prefer to have the pawn advance before playing the knight out. Speaking of pawns, the most famous quote associated with Philidor is, "Pawns are the soul of chess." This is where Philidor was truly revolutionary. Back in the 1700s, most of the players treated pawns as something of an irrelevance. They would sacrifice them, they just wouldn't treat them with great care, because it was all about swashbuckling combinations, right, going for checkmate. But Philidor advocated for a more careful approach and explained through his book and through his games that pawn play could actually make a big difference to the outcome of the game. So this famous quote from Philidor, "Pawns are the soul of chess," I'm going to go back to the original source where this was taken from, because I think the fuller version of the passage gives a better sense of what Philidor was really getting at. And it goes like this: "Good play of the pawns, they are the soul of chess. It is they alone that determine the attack and the defence, and the winning or losing of the game depends entirely on their good or bad arrangement." So the thing that made Philidor see chess differently from anyone who came before him was this: realizing that pawns and pawn structure can point to the correct plan to carry out the game. Now, one criticism of Philidor is that he overstates the case. It isn't true that the winning or losing of the game always depends entirely on the good or bad arrangement of pawns. There are positions where the pawn structure is irrelevant to the evaluation of the position. But then there are other positions where the pawn structure is essential to the evaluation of the position. In any case, he got the chess world to think in a different way about pawns. And one part of Philidor's insight about pawns that I really love is how it mirrored what was going on in broader society at the time. Now, as both a famous musician and a chess master, Philidor moved in intellectual circles. In fact, It is known that he knew men like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Voltaire, and Denis Diderot. Now, these are key members of the Enlightenment, the idea that the common man deserved more rights than had traditionally been granted to him in a world that was dominated by the church and monarchy. So you had Philidor with his ideas that pawns were the soul of chess and that pawns were important. And at the same time, you had these Enlightenment thinkers advocating for things like democracy, human rights. Another example where chess mirrors what's going on in society at large. Unfortunately, though, it was this Enlightenment concept that spawned the French Revolution. And it was intellectual members of society such as Philidor who were being guillotined during the Reign of Terror that followed. Now, Philidor wasn't actually executed. He was in the United Kingdom at the time when the French Revolution struck, but he was unable to return to his native France and spent the rest of his days in the United Kingdom and ultimately ended his life there as well. So a sad end for Philidor, but on a happier note, there is a statue dedicated to him in Paris on the Opéra Garnier for his contribution to music. There's also a street named after him in Paris. A rather unremarkable street, by the way, but if you go there, you can go to Rue Philidor, and there's an inscription that is dedicated to his feats as a musician and as a chess player. And we also have this opening, the Philidor defense. Just one more fun story about the Philidor defense. It concerns one of the most famous chess games ever played, between the legendary American player Paul Morphy and a combination of two men playing as a team, Duke Karl and Count Isoard. Now, this game was played in Paris in 1858, so around 60 years after Philidor's death. But this game came to be known as the Opera game, and it began as a Philidor defense. So I think it's rather neat that we've got the Opera game, which started as a Philidor defense, given that Philidor himself made his career as a musician in the opera. There's plenty of videos out there that analyse the Opera game, but beginning as a Philidor defense, we see Morphy strike in the centre. Pretty quickly, the two men playing black makes this capture on f3. Morphy threatens checkmate, which the two men defend, but then Morphy introduces this double threat. Much later in the game, we have this combination, which is one of the most beautiful ever played on the 64 squares. We have this exchange sacrifice, rook takes d7. The two men capture back, of course. Then Morphy adds more pressure. And then we get this stunning combination. Okay, the bishop takes the rook. Knight takes on d7. And then this amazing shot, queen b8 check. Sacrificing the queen. The point is that after it was taken, as played in the game, rook d8 is checkmate. Unfortunately, Philidor didn't see his defense win the game. Black was crushed in this encounter, but a fun story nonetheless. So, if you enjoyed these stories about the history of the Philidor defense, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I'll be continuing this series on the wonderful world of chess opening names very soon. So by subscribing, you won't miss out when the new episodes drop. Also, consider grabbing yourself a copy of the book. I've got more than 50 openings explained with stories just like this one. I think you'll like it. I think you'll appreciate the game more too when you know some more about the history and heritage of this great game. Thanks for watching. I'm Nathan Rose, and bye for now.